During temporary easing of the communist regime in the early 1960s, a new generation of national intellectuals, known as the generation of the 60s or the 60ers, appeared in Ukraine. They expressed their support for the Ukrainian language and culture. Vasyl Symonenko was one of the most prominent figures of this generation.
Кінець 40-х, десь початок 50-х років.
The late 1940s, early 1950s was a period of orphanage. This period produced the generation to which Vasyl Symonenko belonged. It was the generation of pre-war children.
Тому що це діти, народжені довоєнні.
They entered Ukrainian literature in the late 1950s and reached their heyday in the early 1960s.
І розкрило себе на початку 60-х, і ми їх називаємо шістдесятники.
This generation was called the 60ers. Symonenko was the best blooming branch on the Ukrainian poetic tree.
В українській поетичному дереві.
Symonenko was the first to write touching poems in the open press. He expressed his love to Ukraine and his compatriots positively, powerfully, and convincingly. Patriarch of Ukrainian literature, Oles Honchar, called Vasyl Symonenko Knight of Young Ukrainian Poetry. He wrote the following. The poetry of Vasyl Symonenko came from the depths of people's lives. It described courage, grief, and the victorious fight of the Ukrainian people. His poetry took enduring encouragement and endless passion for his people. The wind of time and change couldn't cool down Symonenko's poems. They continued to burn in the fire of the soul as they did when they first escaped passionately to the outside world. Vasyl Symonenko began his life in the small village of Bevzy in the Poltava region. The future Ukrainian poet was born on January 8, 1935, into a Ukrainian peasant family. His family saw hunger and cold, World War II, and other trials of the 20th century. His parents separated when he was only a year old. His grandfather, Fedor, who embroidered towels well and narrated Vasyl Ukraine's history, raised his grandson. Vasyl Symonenko began to write poems at school. His dream to work with the Ukrainian language and people determined his future professional path. In 1952, he entered the Faculty of Journalism at the Kyiv State University. His student years became the period of final shaping of his individuality and worldview that soon developed into patriotic poetry. After graduating from the university in 1957, the young journalist got a job in the editorial office of the Cherkasy Truth newspaper as officer of the Cultural Department. In 3 years, he moved to the regional newspaper, The Youth of the Cherkasy region. Soon, he became personal correspondent of the working newspaper in Kyiv. Being a journalist, Symonenko wrote many articles and published works of other authors because he was shy about publishing his non-perfect, in his view, poetry. During this period, he wrote his best poems. Handwriting and distributing of his poems initiated the Ukrainian resistance movement of the 1960s, 1970s.
Будучи студентом, з Черкас навчався один із журналістів.
I remember when a student, my fellow student from the city of Cherkasy who studied by correspondence, brought unpublished poems of Symonenko.
Давав нам, студентам, ми передруковували на машинці по колу.
He shared them with us, students. We retyped them. His poems were distributed among students in various years of study. I consider his poems to have shaped the worldview of my fellow students, including my own world vision.
Наш курс, світогляд нашого курсу формувався під цим впливом Симоненка, в тому числі і мій.
His first book of poems, Silence and Thunder, was published in 1962. The above book was long published, but in its abridged version, and was censored. For this reason, the author didn't enjoy it, although readers and critics highly appreciated it. Then it became clear that an original poet with high potential had entered literature. The book Silence and Thunder became the first and only to be published during his lifetime, because his other poems satirized the Soviet regime and preached against its effort to erase all that was Ukrainian and impose all that was Russian. Besides that, the poet described the hard luck of the Ukrainian people, especially peasantry, and he expressed love for his homeland. In the spring of 1960s, Khrushchev's thaw led to establishing the Club of Creative Youth. Symonenko was its active member. He readily traveled Ukraine and met with youth to awaken their national conscience. Later, he joined the committee involved in investigating the mass shooting of the NKVD and locating the mass graves of victims of Stalin's terror. The committee, accompanied by painter Alla Horshka, who later became a Ukrainian human rights activist, visited many villages of the Kyiv region and asked hundreds of people. The people helped to identify unmarked graves of victims of Stalinism at the Lukyanivske and Vasylkivske cemeteries in the Bukovina forest. Vasyl Symonenko and other activists filed a request to the Kyiv authorities to make these locations public and to turn them into national memorials. The Kyiv authorities left the above request unattended, and the poet fell within the scope of special attention to the relevant public bodies.
Документи про Василя Симоненка проходять у контексті.
The name of Vasyl Symonenko was connected with anti-Soviet nationalist groups in the context of investigating his involvement in the anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda.
З приводу проведення ними антирадянської агітації і пропаганди. Дуже очевидно просліджується.
There was an obvious ban on publishing his works, because Symonenko was considered an ideologist and torch of the light against the Soviet regime.
Прапором боротьби проти радянської влади.
The name of Vasyl Symonenko was in the reports of activities of Ukrainian intellectuals.
Є короткі анотації, короткі.
There are short abstracts on the political situation that mention the name of Vasyl Symonenko.
Також згадується Василь Симоненко. Зокрема, говориться, що спочатку між ними йдеться про
The abstracts focus on bringing intellectuals into the fold of Lenin's teaching. There were restrictions in the use of the Ukrainian language and a ban on publishing works by Lina Kostenko, Ivan Zuba, Vasyl Symonenko, Ivan Drach, and other young writers.
Ліни Костенко, Вінграновського, Івана Дзюби, Василя Симоненка, Івана Драча та деяких інших молодих літераторів.
In the summer of 1962, the poet was severely beaten by policemen at the railway station in the town of Smela in the Cherkasy region. In his friend's opinion, the beating was not a coincidence. Since then, Vasyl's health started to deteriorate. From the spring of 1963, Vasyl Symonenko's disease worsened. Soon his family faced his diagnosis, cancer of the kidney. The operation was ineffective. Vasyl Symonenko died on December 13, 1963. He was buried in the city of Cherkasy. A granite monument to the famous artist bears the words of his son, the swans of motherhood. You can choose anything at all, my son, but for you the fatherland is only one. But works by Vasyl Symonenko did not leave the Soviet power in peace even after his death. Our archive contains highly interesting and valuable papers.
Це доповідна записка прокуратури УРСР і КДБ.
Its report of the prosecutor's office and KGB of the Ukrainian SSR, dated May 1966, analyzes Ukrainian nationalist press in detail.
Української націоналістичної преси. Мова йде про роль Василя Симоненка.
This also includes the role and impact of Vasyl Symonenko in both Ukraine and the world. It shows the reasons why Symonenko's works could not be published in Ukraine. They were widely published abroad.
Зі зрозумілих причин не могли бути надруковані в Україні. Вони дуже широко друкувалися за кордоном.
His poetic handwriting heritage has been collected since the 1980s. The funds of the National Museum of Literature of Ukraine possess an invaluable exhibit called Main Copybook of Vasyl Symonenko.
Він творився з кінця 61-го по жовтень 62-го.
He wrote it between late December 1961 and October 1962. It took over 10 months. Among his works was the following.
Така програмна річ, як «Україна п'є твої зіниці».
May the Russians and Americans of the world be silent when I'm talking to you.
Буду, мамо, гордо і вродлива з тебе дивуватися повік. І ось, хрестоматійне, ради тебе перли в душі сію, ради тебе мислю і творю, хай мовчать Америки і Росії, коли я з тобою говорю.
Нехай мовчать Америки і Росії, коли я з матір'ю говорю.
May Russia's and Americas be silent when I'm talking to my mother. It was said in wild Khrushchev's times. It was necessary to have the courage to write this.
мати поетичну мужність.
He undoubtedly had courage and could add his golden page to the history of Ukrainian poetry.
В історії української поезії.
The poet gained recognition after death. In 1995, Vasyl Symonenko was awarded the posthumous Taras Shevchenko National Prize. Books of his poems are republished in large print runs. The poet's works have entered school curricula in Ukraine. Most of them have been set to music. American singer of Ukrainian origin Kvitka Tsisuk performed a song based on Symonenko's poem The Swans of Motherhood. The poetry by Vasyl Symonenko has invisibly been present in the recent public developments. The eternal host of the Euromaidan revolution, Yevhen Nishchuk, repeatedly read Symonenko's poems on the stage. He ardently recited poems of the poet-patriot. My nation is, my nation will live eternally, and no one will eradicate my nation's life.